And for some more analysis now, we're joined by the chief Washington correspondent for the New York Times, David Sanger, and David Rohde, who is a columnist for both Reuters and The Atlantic. David, you wrote in the late editions of the Times this morning that this was what you called a modest down payment. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that, Bob, is that what the United States is trying to accomplish here is to greatly expand the dash time to a bomb, the amount of time it would take Iran, if it ever decided to get a weapon, to actually go race for it. This initial agreement buys them a month to a couple of months, people in the intelligence agencies say, but the centrifuges will keep spinning. They won't be adding to the stockpile. So I think that Secretary Kerry is absolutely right when he says that they're much better off to have this than they would be not to have it, where the system would have built up in about 6 months to something significantly greater.
What's your take, David?
I think for Kerry, it's a step forward. It's very similar to me to when he got the Israelis and the Palestinians to come back to the negotiating table. There isn't a deal here with the Iranians. This is a freeze. So in essence, we've got 6 months now to see if there can be an actual agreement that rolls back this program or not. Just like with the Israeli and Palestinians, that's a 9-month process. So, you know, it's a start. It's a very significant thing. People didn't think Kerry would even get this far, but this is not some breakthrough agreement at this point.
Well, you know, we've interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu a couple of times over the last 6 weeks, I guess. It's no surprise to me that he didn't like this. But I must say, he came on even stronger this morning than I thought he would, David.
He did. And what he said was that Israel would be less secure than it was before this agreement. And what he means by that is he believes that this agreement basically will be the only one they get, that they won't get to the bigger one, and thus it will have enshrined the status quo. But, you know, if the administration did not take an attempt to do this, Bob, I think it's very hard to know whether you ever could have gotten rollback, ever could have gotten dismantlement, and that's what they're trying to get at.
And so what do you think happens now with Israel, David?
I think the Israelis are going to make a lot of noise. We'll see what happens in Congress. There'll be pressure there for new sanctions. The Iranians have said that if there are additional sanctions, that this deal is off. So it'll be a difficult time for the administration. I think they'll go ahead. The danger, though, is that no big deal emerges from this, that it's an Iranian game where they just sort of negotiate every 6 months, every 6 months, and every 6 months. So the president has to show he's serious about reinstating these sanctions if a deal doesn't happen.
All right. Well, if you all will stand by, we're going to talk about this some more on page 2 of Face the Nation, and we'll be back in 1 minute. Well, welcome back to Face the Nation. David Sanger of the New York Times, David Rohde of Reuters and The Atlantic are back with us. We're also joined by Wall Street Journal columnist Kimberley Strassel and our own John Dickerson. Kimberley, let me just start with you. You heard the analysis of the two Davids here. What's your take on this?
Well, they had mentioned that the intelligence officials think that this may buy us some time. I think the fear here, and this is the fear you're seeing expressed by the Israelis and others, is that this buys the Iranians some time, because this is what they have done in the past. In the past, whenever international anger grows, they suddenly come out, say they're willing to do some sort of negotiation. The sanctions come back down. This has allowed them to proceed with their program. And it seems to be happening again here, too. They knew that they are facing increased new sanctions, another round of them here in Congress. So suddenly they look as though they're willing to do something with the hope that the United States stands down on that. It gives them the chance to get some relief, have some money again, and maybe restart some of their ambitions without, and then going forward, we'll be able to continue at any time. They're still going to be enriching.
What's going to happen upon Congress, John? Because, I mean, you know, I see even before this agreement was finally reached, you had somebody like Chuck Schumer, who's one of the strongest administration backers, expressing some reservations.
That's right. The president met this week with senators in both parties saying, wait, just don't create new sanctions while I'm trying to work this thing out. The White House thinks that now they have about 6 months to work on this bigger deal. They think they'll be able to hold support together without new sanctions coming up. But it's not going to be easy. They're going to have some tending to do. You know, one thing that strikes me, Bob, is we look at this president and how he's pinned down on the domestic front. But presidents still have power. When you look at what he did this week, there's a security deal with Afghanistan. One of the promises in 2008 that Senator Obama made is he'd get us out of those two wars. And he also promised that he would negotiate with Iran and some of America's enemies. And so we're seeing that come to fruition as well. So even though the president's taking some pounding on the domestic front, he is still having an influence that goes all the way back to the things he said in his campaign in 2008.
David, do you think that this, we heard Steny Hoyer and Kevin McCarthy, both the House has already passed stiffer sanctions. Mr. Hoyer is saying that he would like to see the Senate go ahead and do this, but put in a proviso there that they won't go into effect for 6 months. Do you think it'll be that easy?
I don't think it'll be that easy, but I suspect in the end they'll probably let the president play out his gamble. And the gamble is exactly what Kim and John were discussing. The two options here, Bob, are to relax the sanctions a bit and hope that it creates enough of a hunger inside Iran that there's an appetite for more sanctions relief, which they're only going to get by dismantling part of the system, versus the approach that you see Prime Minister Netanyahu urging, which is raise the sanctions and just hope that Iran's going to crumble and give up the whole program. I think that's a really tough gamble for the president either way. He's making the bet that he can push along this sort of reform movement. Now, if he's wrong, then it's going to be very easy to put more sanctions on. If he's right, I think his problem in Congress is going to be getting the vote, particularly before the midterm elections, to get people to take sanctions away. That's pretty difficult.
David, there is no question that this is administration looking for some good news. But with Netanyahu coming out so strongly against this, how do you see that playing out in this country? Because the Israelis, when they have a mind to, can generate a little opposition. They can do a pretty good job of lobbying.
I think it's a real issue for the administration. It's unusual here. The president and Netanyahu have always had a bad relationship. When Kerry took this job, he played up the fact that he had this good relationship with Netanyahu, and that is not making any difference at this point. So they're going to have a real problem selling this deal. Kerry's, I think in some way deserves some praise. He's brought some risk-taking to this administration. He's taken more risk than Hillary Clinton. What I've seen is that sort of giving up his dream of becoming president has actually maybe potentially made him a better Secretary of State. He's got something very rare in a calculating and cautious Washington. He's really got nothing to lose politically at this point, but he's got to deliver. This has to deliver an actual deal, or it's not going to really, he won't be delivering on the promise of diplomacy.
Because the Israeli argument here, which is a very powerful one, is that the only reason the Iranians have felt willing to have this as discussion is because the sanctions regime has built up to such that the pressure is huge. You take any of that away, even a small, Kerry was trying to suggest this is just a small diminution of the sanctions regime. But you take that away in any way, do they still feel obliged to continue doing anything? And that has been the argument against. The argument has been, if you're going to cease your nuclear program, then you should do it immediately and without any preconditions.
And there's a question about what's going on inside Iran. There's a very strong hard line there, the Revolutionary Guard that wants no part of this deal, and they want to go nuclear. Is Rouhani, and Zarif, do they really represent a genuine liberal movement? Can Obama help the moderates in Iran?
Part of this, Bob, is a question of what your ultimate end game is. So for President Obama, we've heard him say, and he said again last night, that his end game is to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. The Israeli, the Saudi, the Arab end game's a little bit different. They don't even want Iran to have a nuclear capability, the ability to actually go up and just be a few screwdriver turns away from this. And that's why, if you're Obama, this preliminary deal is a pretty good deal. And if you're Israel or the Arab states, it doesn't do anything to get at that capability, and it might enshrine that capability.
How far are, say, the Saudis from having a nuclear weapon?
We don't think they've got a nuclear weapons program, but they underwrote the Pakistani program, which was put together by A.Q. Khan more than a decade ago. And there's always been an assumption that if they ever needed a weapon, they could make a deal with the Pakistanis to get one. Now, you can imagine...
What would they do? They just buy it?
They've already paid for it under that theory, and the question is, how would you get it delivered? Mm-hmm. But this is something that U.S. intelligence watches like a hawk, as you can imagine. And at various moments, when the Saudis want to turn up the heat, they keep saying, look, if we think Iran is too close, we're not going to let there be a Shia bomb. We're going to make sure that there's a Sunni alternative.
John, the president has the lowest approval ratings of his presidency. His signature program is now opposed by 61% of the people. Does this have any impact on any of that? I mean, I consider the politics of this the least significant part when we're talking about preventing somebody from getting a nuclear weapon,
Right.
but politics does play a role here.
Right. Well, as Kennedy
And
used
there
to
is fallout.
Kennedy used to say, politics can get you hurt politically, but in foreign policy it can kill you. So it's more important on foreign policy. It was interesting to see Kevin McCarthy say, well, he would hope that politics didn't get involved. John Cornyn, senator from Texas, very senior senator on the Republican side, said his first reaction on Twitter was, it's amazing what the administration will do to deflect from Obamacare, which gives you some sense of the sort of supercharged nature of this feeding into the original domestic debate over the president's health care plan. The president's approval ratings are low, and on the question of trust, there's been a case in the past where when the president's approval rating has gone very low, like during the 2011 debt ceiling debate, people still trusted the president. That's not the case here. In our poll last September, 60% of the country said they trusted the president. Now only 49% of the country say they trust him. So that makes everything harder for him. The big date to watch, of course, he's got one more week to deliver on this promise that the health care website will work. That's important not only because they need to get people out there and signed up, but also it's another promise and it's another test of his credibility. The White House says it's going to be working as promised in a week. There are not many people outside of the administration who think that's going to be true.
You think that'll happen?
You know, I thought Steny Hoyer, give him credit. He put his finger right on the question that is out there. He said, and Democrats want this to be about claiming that the only problem here is a failure of access to Obamacare. The interesting question increasingly, and it's why you see more Democrats nervous, is that there's beginning to be a fear that, in fact, Obamacare is the problem, in that is, in fact, this law working exactly the way it was set up to work? If you're going to cover a lot of uninsured people and people who are sick, the way the mechanics of this works is the only thing you can do is make a lot of people who are healthy and younger and who liked their plans pay a lot more for their health care. So you're going to continue seeing those cancellation notices come in, continue seeing people lose their doctors, continue. And that's even the people who are getting into the exchange. That's what they're finding there.
John, I want to, because we don't have much time left, but to our viewers out there who don't know, John's mother was Nancy Dickerson, who was a very well-known White House correspondent for CBS way back there. And you talked this week about, we're getting ready to talk to Clint Hill, Jackie Kennedy's Secret Service agent, but you talked this week about an amazing dinner that your mother had with the Johnsons the day after they came back to Washington from Dallas.
It was amazing. She'd known Johnson since she worked up on the Hill, so they'd been friends for a while. He'd been watching TV that day in addition to all of his other duties, and he saw her and talking about whether House Speaker Rayburn had supported Johnson ever joining the ticket. And she had said, well, you know, he might have. There was a lot of debate about that at the time. Johnson liked the idea that she said that Rayburn had liked it. Why? Because he wanted nobody to think that there was not a close relationship between Johnson and Kennedy. So he said, come on over. When he got over there...
And this was the day after he got back from Dallas.
The 23rd, his first full day as president. And they arrived late at night, and he was trying to get in touch with the White House, and the phones wouldn't work. And he said, you know, we could be under attack, which he thought might be possible. He thought there was another stage in this, what it might be a kind of a Soviet attack, a coup. He didn't know what. He said we could be under attack, and I couldn't get the Secretary of State on the phone. The next minute, he's on the phone with his speechwriter's daughter, who has got her boyfriend there, and he assures the young man that everything's going to be okay, as if he was comforting the nation kind of one person at a time. He gets off the phone, puts that down, starts talking to the television, worried that they're going to incite riots in the country if they amp up the talk of conspiracy. And so it was just a tumultuous evening in which the president's kind of taking control of his office, but also trying to just kind of figure out the new situation he was in.
He really had this innate sense of command, didn't he? I mean, from the moment he got on that Air Force plane to come back, and when he took the oath, he took charge.
He did, and he was worried about how everything would look in terms of that question of continuity. When the phones didn't work, he said, I want to change that, but I don't want to change anything else. In other words, I don't want to change anything from the Kennedy administration. I want that continuity to be there. I want to be a caretaker of the previous thing. He was always thinking about how it would look, even in a private dinner party of a few people, how it would look, that continuity with the slain president, keeping in mind already that night he was thinking about what his plans would be in 1965, after he'd won re-election in 64. He was thinking a long way out.
All right. Well, listen, thank you all for being with us this morning on this historic weekend. We'll be back in 1 minute.